Hey guys, how are you doing today? It's P.E. Gilbert, your blogger, writing consultant, and the author to the fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter. And today we are honoured to have an interview with the Amazon best-selling author and the owner of Legacy Books, Garrett Robinson. Garrett has written many books in the fantasy genre, including the Nightblade Epic series, the Academy Journal series, and the Tales of the Wanderer, among other books. Garrett is enthusiastic, prolific, and knowledgeable. Here is the interview. Enjoy. So tell us a bit about yourself. What was the spark that made you decide to write your first book?
Well, it was a weird sort of circuitous route that led to me starting my writing and publishing and eventually creating a publishing company around it. I wanted to be a writer when I was a teenager, and I wrote many hundreds of thousands of words of really bad fan fiction. And some original scribbles, but just nothing close to a completed original work. And then I finished high school. I went out, did some, a couple of random jobs and whatnot. And having grown up in, and at that time living in Los Angeles, I found myself sort of accidentally thrown into filmmaking. And I still to this day, that is my absolute favorite thing. It's so incredible and wonderful. And I tried kind of breaking into that industry for a number of years, and it's hard, which I don't think is a huge surprise to anybody, especially if you are from Los Angeles. And it was a number of years after I'd been doing that my best friend was talking with me over drinks one day, and he said, "You know what your problem is trying to get into the industry is you don't have the cred or the connections. You don't have some rich uncle who will invest in your first feature, and you don't have family in the industry or anything like that. So you need some strong position to come from when you're going to people and being like, please fund and or produce my movie." I think that you should take, and the other very difficult thing about that whole career for me was that I always wanted to make Lord of the Rings, the next Lord of the Rings, whatever the big next huge epic fantasy was. I didn't want to make, small, calm, quiet little films, psychological thrillers and low budget stuff. I wanted to go big. And so it was my friend who said, this idea for this fantasy series, this fantasy show, or, series of films that you've just been tooling around forever. I think that you should write that and self-publish it and put it out there on your own and grow that into like a good, career with an audience. And then you could walk into a Hollywood pitch meeting and be like, here's my script. It's based on these best-selling books that I also wrote. Like, then you're negotiating from a position of power. And so I started back in 2012, and I wrote some other things, ironically, sort of like smaller, more contained, sort of low budget stories. And then I started getting into the fantasy that I'd wanted to write for a long time, and it all just kind of took off from there. And now I've been writing professionally for 7 years, and it's been a pretty amazing journey.
Sounds like a fantastic journey. And your
Yeah.
friend sounds like a phenomenal friend at that, with
Yeah.
fantastic advice.
Yeah. He's also, we also co-wrote a kids fantasy series together that contrary to what else I've done, we're actually pitching that one to traditional publishing right now. So we'll see if that goes anywhere, but he's a really great guy. I'm grateful to have him in my life.
Good luck. I really
Yeah.
hope that it goes well for the both of you.
Yeah. We do too.
You have written many books in the fantasy genre. What made you decide to write in this genre in particular?
Well, I've been a fantasy fan, basically my whole life. I discovered The Hobbit on my own as a school book when I was, I think, 9 or 10. And I came home from school when I'd finished it, and I said, I mentioned at dinner that I'd read it, and my dad was like, "You read The Hobbit?" And he had been a huge Tolkien nerd his whole life, and it just wasn't something that he had yet like really thought to introduce me to. And by the way, as a father myself now, and having, my oldest child is 11, I also would not have thought of introducing The Hobbit to my kids when they were 7 years old. You know what I mean? It just seemed a little, it seemed a little much. But I got super into it, and then I read that a couple more times, and then I read Lord of the Rings, and then he started introducing me to other series like Terry Goodkind and all sorts of different stuff, and that just became such a huge thing for me. And then when the movies came out in the late 90s, early 2000s, that just completely cemented it for me forever. I wanted to live in universes and worlds like that, and I wanted to build universes and worlds like that. And so, like I said, when I first started writing, I tried some other stuff. I tried writing, a more psychological thriller, and I wrote sort of like a zombie comedy movie, a la like Shaun of the Dead, and it was fun, and I like those stories a lot. And then I was like, okay, well, let me finally, I feel like I've gotten sort of like my basic writing craft down a little bit. Let me add world building and all of this, other stuff that goes into fantasy. And I started writing, and the moment that I started, I just said, yeah, this is it. This is my thing. This is what I love to do. I enjoy working on it more than anything else that I've done before. And so I've stuck with it ever since, and it has been good to me.
Well, that's very, very pleasing to hear. We're
Yeah.
glad you have chosen the fantasy genre. And I bet your dad was so proud of you when you went home one day and said, Dad, I've read The Hobbit.
Yeah, he really was. Yeah, I was just actually reflecting on this the other day, because I found out that J. Michael Straczynski was on Twitter, and I guess I should have figured that he was. He's a screenwriter who's one of those names that you've probably heard a lot, but he's not, some huge, like, he's not one of the biggest names in the industry, except he almost like should be, because he's written so many things that everybody knows. And when I found out he was on Twitter, I wrote him this whole long Twitter thread about my dad, who has passed away now a few years ago. And when I was a kid, whether it was The Hobbit or whether it was a show like Babylon 5, which Straczynski wrote, my some of my best memories were enjoying these stories that were Babylon 5, like a 5-year TV show, and just watching and becoming completely obsessed with them, but not doing that alone, doing that with my dad and reading these stories or watching these shows. And when the Marvel movies started coming out, that was our new obsession. And we would get together and watch all the new ones in the theaters, or, sit at home and watch whatever TV show it was. And then for the next week, that was pretty much all we were talking about. And mom would have to, drag us away so that I would do my homework. And, it's that sense of sharing stories with people that you really love has always been a big thing that I've tried to achieve with what I write. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I'm sorry to hear that your father is no longer with us,
Thank
but
you.
I'm sure he'd be very proud of you and everything that you're doing and with your ambitions as well.
Yeah, he got to see a lot of it happen, and a lot of the early stuff in particular, and it was nice to have him in my corner.
Amen. What subgenre or subgenres of fantasy do you write in, and who is the target audience for your books?
Well, there's a few different ways to answer that. So, I always like to stress when the discussion gets to genre that I feel like genre is mostly a marketing tool. Okay. I feel like the concept of genre, to a large degree, was kind of invented by publishers so that they could market by association. Oh, you like Lord of the Rings? You will also like Game of Thrones. Although, those are two wildly different stories with wildly different styles, wildly different themes and whatnot. But there was enough of a, you like swords and dragons and magic, we are going to market this other story that also has sword and dragons and magic. So when it gets into subgenre, the easiest answer would be epic fantasy. So if you like Tolkien, if you like Martin, if you like the Sword of Truth series or the Wheel of Time, there's a strong chance that you will find things in my books to appeal. I kind of enjoy the tag of heroic fantasy, although that's not one that I see officialized very much. It's not a category you can select on Amazon, for example, because I like things to be epic in scope, and they are pretty epic in scope. But I'm much more focused on heroic individuals, and specifically individuals who have more of an inner heroism than an outward, you know, dominance factor. I much prefer characters like the hobbits, who were the focus of Tolkien's work, whereas it seems like a lot of fantasy authors since then, and there's nothing wrong with this, it's merely a matter of preference and taste, but a lot of authors after that seem to have written stories that were more about Aragorn, about figures who were these great and mighty warriors who were pinnacles of their age and who had power commensurate to that. And you find that in places, well, you find it in Game of Thrones to a degree, although Game of Thrones does a really good job of juxtaposing that with the common folk and showing how ordinary people are affected too and making ordinary people protagonists. But whether it's sort of Truth, Wheel of Time, you have the focus on these, you know, these uber individuals who are just incredibly powerful and learning to harness their power and pit it against other foes and entities that are more powerful than they are. And I feel like that, in combination with the big society spanning problems, is where that epic tag comes from. So I like to call it more heroic fantasy, where it's just kind of a couple of people who probably shouldn't even be there, but they ended up with the ring, so they have to walk to Mount Doom. You know, that's the sort of story that I like to tell. I also, this is again not a you know, officialized subgenre yet, but I'm trying to write stories that are more diverse and representative than a lot, not all, but than a lot of typical epic fantasy has been in the past. So you know, I have a huge queer audience, you know, many characters in my book who identify somewhere on that spectrum and who find relatable characters in my books, and I think that that's a good thing. You know, I think that that's a thing that should be included more in books, and so that is an audience that I'm always thinking with and interacting with and trying to learn how to serve better. Although in terms of an official subgenre, I don't know if that counts. That's up for other people to decide.
You are not just an author, but an
No.
Amazon best-selling author. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well
Yeah.
done. Muzzle top.
Thank you.
You've done all the hard work here. You've marketed your books well, even if, you know, you say it's just a construct that has been artificially created by publishers. You know, whatever you're doing it right.
Yeah.
But why do you think readers have enjoyed your books so much?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Okay, I'm going to go on a total tangent as a lead into this question. If you're, you know, super familiar with YouTube culture, you've probably heard of two creators called the Vlog Brothers. Are you aware of John and Hank Green, the Vlog
Yes.
Brothers? Okay, so anybody who doesn't watch them, you should probably go check them out. You're probably going to enjoy them a lot. They're fantastic. But Hank Green in particular is just one of my favorite people and one of my favorite online creators in general. And he often is on panels or in interviews, and he gets asked the question that so many people ask so many different creators when they're interviewing them, which is like, what would be your advice to somebody starting out today? And Hank has coined an answer that I love so much and that I have found it necessary to adopt to a degree myself, which is, the only way I know how to succeed in YouTube is to start in 2007. And for me, the only way that I know how to succeed as an indie author is to start in 2013, because that's when I got my start. And the times that I hit number one in the Kindle store and was literally the best-selling book on all of Amazon were times when I was able to do various types of marketing that have faded away in either effectiveness or in terms of, you know, in terms of their ability to be gotten. For example, everybody knows, you know, BookBub, right? It's this huge book marketing opportunity, and if you can get a featured deal in one of their newsletters, oh my gosh, you're off to the races. And you know, in combination with everything else I was doing, those were the times that I hit number one in the store. BookBub doesn't like indie authors as much anymore. They're playing with the big publishers now, and they're very happy to play with the big publishers. And they especially don't like books that are in Kindle Unlimited. And I don't want to pull myself out of Kindle Unlimited because that's where all my readers are. And that's where, so much of my audience came from in the first place. So it's an interesting quandary where I got to a point where I was, having my success and I had my audience and I knew what they liked and I wanted to continue serving that. And, nowadays it's a different game. And you could, if you were just getting started now, I would suggest learning what is working now and evolving with the times and evolving with those strategies. And I take a different approach of serving the readers who have gotten me where I am and evolving what I can out of like the new techniques. But for example, remaining in Kindle Unlimited is a thing that's very important to me because I get emails every day, well, not every day, but every week from people who are like, I'm so glad that I found your books on Kindle Unlimited. It's so great to be able to read them all and everything like that. So it's an interesting thing to navigate for sure. And I think that somebody like Mark Dawson is a perfect person to turn to for like what's working now, you know what I mean, as opposed to what was working 6 years ago, because this is a really fast evolving industry for sure.
Which of your characters in any of your books is the most like you and how?
Oh boy. Yeah. So I saw that question, and that question is an interesting one. I know there are various schools of thought. Some people say that it's unavoidable that your characters are going to contain shards of yourself. Other people say, no, I strive to write people who are completely different from me. I don't want them to be like me in any way. Um, I'm probably more in the former camp. In fact, I have to, in order to have my characters be different from each other, I have to stop them all from being kind of a little bit too much like me. They get to be, when I finish a book, I usually have to go through and reduce the sameness of everybody by really analyzing like how they're different and strengthening that. So the truth is that you can find a lot of me in quite a few characters in the books, particularly the protagonists. But I try to take either things that I like about myself and enhance them, and maybe even take them to like an extreme that's maybe a little bit too far. So, for example, there's Lauren from the Nightblade epic. She's very self-confident. I'm quite a self-confident person. She's maybe a little too self-confident. She's like, oh, I can get myself out of anything, so I don't really care what I get into, and that's I'm not to that extreme. And I don't necessarily recommend that people go to that extreme because you can get into some trouble that you can't get yourself out of. And then in a very different way, Eben from the Academy Journals is a self-acknowledged child of privilege. He grew up in an extremely wealthy merchant family, and I grew up in, very wealthy circumstances. That my, I've told this story before, but basically, I grew up with parents who were quite rich, and then they literally lost it all in an economic crash, and all of a sudden, I was having to like that was what made me realize that like, oh, this isn't what life is like for everybody all the time. And I would probably be the biggest tech bro douchebag if that hadn't happened to my family. So like in one sense, it's not great that it happened. In the other, I legitimately think it made me a better person because I didn't walk around going like, oh, well, everybody kind of gets what they want all the time. So like what even problems are there in the world? And that was what like sort of made me realize that like, oh, you know, there are struggles in the world and it's probably worth spending your time trying to make things easier on other people. So, in a similar way, Eben in the Academy Journals grew up very, very wealthy, very privileged and everything like that. And then, through a series of circumstances, has to learn to, care and empathize more with helping other people, and trying to use his position and the gifts that he's been given through no achievement of his own, use those in order to turn his life into helping other people, into making the world better, which is something that I'm constantly struggling to do and failing a lot of the time, just like he does. So those are probably the two clearest threads of myself that I can see in characters in my books.
On a meta level, what do your stories mean to you?
Well, honestly, they go back to what I was talking about with Tolkien, because I find it much more interesting when somebody who the world doesn't necessarily see as being special, finds their own way to use whatever abilities and gifts they have to become special, to see situations that are wrong, or to see things that need to be fixed, and to go about fixing them with no greater ability than any other person, no superpower that solves the problem for them, but just their own determination to make it happen. And also, in a way, there's a lot of meditation in my books about, like, we don't always know what the right thing to do is, and we have to, well, to borrow a line from, of all places, Frozen 2, we have to just do the next right thing, whatever the next thing is that we know is good, that we know is going to make things at least a little bit better, that we know is going to help some people and make some things as good as we can make them. I think that's what we have to do. I think that if you're a responsible person, that, to some degree, you have to actually do something about that. And so there's a phrase that I wrote down in some notebook some time ago, and it's sort of become a way that I see a lot of the issues in the world. And, there are so many issues in the world, especially in the last couple of years. Oh my gosh. But the phrase basically being, we don't know what to do, but we know that we have to do something. And that's what I feel like a lot of us are feeling a lot of the time. We know that something's wrong and that something has to be done about it. We don't know exactly what is the best of all possible solutions, and we don't know if our ideas are going to solve and fix everything. In fact, we're pretty sure that our ideas aren't going to fix everything, but we have to do something anyway, because the alternative is to just let things continue to get worse. And so I'm trying to instill that idea in people in my books, or at the very least, I'm trying to make them understand why I feel that way.
You also run Legacy Books and the website underrealm.net. What do those entail, both in general and on a day-to-day basis?
Well, Legacy Books came about from my continuing evolution of trying to do good. So I mentioned before that I thought that it was important to have more representation and more varieties of types of characters in my books, because I could see that there were people out there who wanted that in the fantasy genre. Maybe they liked Lord of the Rings, but they had some, issues with some aspects of representation within it. And that's not a condemnation. That's not, people throwing the whole series out. That's just saying, like, wouldn't it be cool if it also had this? And I was like, well, there's no reason it couldn't. So I started to try and put that into my own work. But then another thing that I came to realize later was something else that these people would say, which is that, okay, so like representation is cool, but if it's not backed up with representation behind the scenes, if you're not including more viewpoints in what you're creating as you're creating it, not just having those characters be in the stories, but having those people tell those stories, that is another massively effective way to make the world and the genre and publishing as a whole better. And so that seed of an idea grew into Legacy Books. And I just said, well, I'm creating this universe, and I'm already writing 3 series in this universe. Well, why not have more people contributing to the same universe? Borrow a page from Marvel and just have the world be Underrealm, and everybody's writing these stories set in the world of Underrealm together so that we're all growing together and succeeding together. I've achieved what I've achieved with my own work. Why not turn around and take those resources and grant them to other people? Again, in the way that I'm hoping Eben is going to continue to learn in his series. You've been given all these things. Some of it's been luck, some of it's been your own hard work, most of it's been a combination of those two things. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to use that to help people and make things better? So that's what Legacy Books is. And so far, we've contracted a number of other authors to write novel series. The first one came out last year. It was A Cloak of Red by Brenna Gawain. It's really, really good. I love it. She's working on the sequel right now, and I'm supposed to be getting it sometime soon here, and I can't wait to read it. We have another author writing another novel series. I just got the first draft of the first half of the book, and it's really good, and I'm really excited to publish that one too. And then 2 years ago, we did a series of short stories called The Chronicles of Underrealm, which were contracted from what was it, 7 different authors, and published as their own sort of miniature series of short stories that all complement the world of the novels and lead into all of that. And we definitely want to do more chronicles in the future, just as a way of introducing people to new authors, as a way of using my platform and the platform that my wife and I have built with our publishing company to put the spotlight on other people and other authors who traditional publishing sometimes overlooks or doesn't pay as much attention to. Underrealm.net is just the home of Legacy Books. LegacyBooks.com is something that we're planning on acquiring when we can, but somebody's holding onto that website really hard. And it is just a place where you can find the books, find the podcast, find everything that we're creating, and a place that we can point to where people can go and support authors directly.
We need more people like you, Garrett.
That
Honestly.
is very nice of you.
Honestly, we really do. You're doing phenomenal work for a lot of people. You're giving people a chance, and
Thank
that
you.
can't be said for a lot of people. You are something special and something unique.
I'm doing my very best. It has its ups and downs, but I'm happy that don't have I'm happy that I get to end most days and most weeks and be proud of what I've been able to do to help other authors.
This is one of my favorite questions to ask authors.
Okay.
If you could go back in time and speak with your younger self, what advice would you give him about the writing process?
Oh my God. Just please stop paying attention to all these other things and please just write the book. Please just write the next book. Focus on that. Everything else, do it when you can afford to have other people do it for you. But all of the most successful times in my life have been when I was consistently writing and putting out books. In 2016, I put out 4 books, and that is far and away the best year I've ever had. And then I had sort of a writing dearth or a slump where for a year and a half, I didn't put out anything. And wouldn't you know it, those years I did not do as well. And it is so easy for me in particular to get focused on other things, to go work on, email or the website or on some other project or something like that. And I really need to just grab myself by the ears and just say, stop doing that other thing. Go write your next book. Oh, but what about that big shiny new project over there? Get someone else to do it, or don't do it at all, because you need to write your next book. I am working really hard on just keeping my butt in the chair, writing on a consistent schedule. And that has been the biggest thing that I've changed in my last year, and which I've started to reclaim my success and my sense of self-control over. That one thing is just stop getting distracted, put your butt in the chair and write.
Well, it sounds like you've learned a lesson, that's for sure, particularly in
Yes.
that time where there was a bit of a dearth of writing, shall we say.
Yeah.
And, it's contributing to your success. And that's
Yeah.
great. Long may it continue.
Thank you. Yes, I am also hopeful of that thing, as is my family.
uh, you've hinted at this answer already, but I'd like to ask again and see what you say. What is the most rewarding part of writing, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, so whatever somebody's reward is valid. A lot of people say that you should only write for yourself. And if I could, like if I only wrote for myself, I wouldn't, I probably wouldn't do it. There are things that I do only do for myself. I don't, I love snowboarding. I don't snowboard for anybody else. I love going on long walks. I don't do that for anybody else. There's lots of things that I love just for myself. The most rewarding part of writing is interacting with people who read the books and enjoy it. And in a sense, the most fun part of writing is being a fan of my own work. And I feel like some people aren't, and some people like struggle with imposter syndrome or whatever else is making them feel like their own work isn't up to the standard that they want. And I get that. And I'm never, most people, I would say, are not ever 100% happy with their books. I've never finished a book and been like, it couldn't get any better. I'm like, no, this is probably as good as I can get it right now. It's time for a new project. But just like I love watching Avatar: The Last Airbender and then geeking out about it with other people who also love it, and watching Antoine Bandelay's videos about it, and just going into deep dives on YouTube personalities who have analyzed everything about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and watching the videos and being like, that's such a good point, I never thought about that so much. I never thought about that. I love this show, it's so great. And that's my favorite part of consuming content. That's my favorite part of creating content. I get fans in my Discord server or email who are like, hey, I've got this fan theory, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong, and it doesn't matter, because it's just them throwing out these ideas and drawing connections to things that maybe I didn't even think of. And there are people out there who have guessed what's going to happen in my next 2 or 3 books, and they type it in Discord or they send me an email. And internally, I'm just like, oh boy, they got it. And then there are other people who are 100% wrong, just like so wrong. They have no idea what's coming. And I love them both equally. I love them both so much because they care, they're engaging with it, and they are a fan of the thing that I am also a fan of. It's just that I also happen to be the person writing the next book. And that is the best thing. That it's like getting to be in the best fan community ever.
That's a great answer. And you sound like you appreciate your fans so
I
much.
love them so much.
I can
They
tell.
really are the best.
Please God, we'll all have a fan base like you do.
Yeah.
You've spoken about the most rewarding part of the writing process, but what is the most challenging part of the writing process?
I hate editing so much. I hate it. I hate it so much. Now, okay, so I don't hate it, and there are moments in editing where I, am working a problem through in my mind, and I come up with some brilliant solution and write some new passage or join 2 sequences together in a better way that is like a flash of discovery and insight, and oh my gosh, what a great solution. And it's that pure creative joy that is just so much fun and, the best part of the job. The only difference is all of outlining and most of writing the first draft is that feeling all the time. When I'm outlining, I'm just throwing ideas out there and I'm spitballing, and it's all this nebulous, formless blob that I can see in my head, and oh, it's going to be so great, it's going to be so perfect. And that is all creative high. First draft, I'm throwing out actual prose and I'm putting words to the ideas that have been stewing in my brain. And that is mostly creative high. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, the words just aren't coming. But mostly I write it all and it comes and it's really fast and it's great and it's all creative high. And then editing. And that is 20% creative high and 80%, oh my God, I have to read these words again and find out what's wrong with them and yada, yada, yada. So it, when I'm in that process, when I'm in the editing process, I have to continually remind myself what it's going to feel like at the end when the book is out and the readers are reading it and I'm getting feedback from them. Because that feeling of having written as opposed to going through the editing process is what sustains me enough to get to the end of it.
I think we can all relate to editing being a challenge, that's for
Yes.
sure. And I like that you stress that even when you're in that most challenging part, even when you're seemingly hitting your head against a brick wall, you're reminding yourself how good it will feel at the end. I think that's
Yeah.
so important, because otherwise there are moments where perhaps one can lose a bit of hope.
For sure, for sure, for sure. And, I feel like that is a huge roadblock to a lot of people. And I feel like, again, I had a pretty big advantage in being a teenager and writing all this, just reams and reams of paper of just the worst, terrible fan fiction ever. And then was when I acquired my taste for having written. You know what I mean? Because I didn't care. I wasn't going to edit. I wasn't going to go back and reread this stuff. I was just going to be like, and then Goku, blew up a friggin', Blood Angel. And I was like crossing genres and stuff like that. And then I would print it out and I would bring it to a couple of friends at school and they would just read it and they would be like, dude, this is so cool. When it was not. It was not so cool. But that feeling, I got to have the feeling of having written something that people were loving and freaking out about without all the pain of the editing process. And so then later when I started writing and I started editing and I was putting out like work that was not only, making people happy, but which I was like proud of artistically, then I slowly got into the fact of like, okay, if I want to have that feeling, not with 3 friends in high school, but with strangers on the internet, I go through the editing process. And at the end of that is a book that I am really proud of showing even complete strangers. And that's sort of what sustained me through it. And so if somebody's in that phase where they're just like, I don't like the creative process, I encourage you to create a throwaway account on Archive of Our Own. Go write some crazy fanfic with your favorite story, because nobody's going to expect it to be well edited. And just if you can't write a fan fiction novel, which some people do, I understand. Write a short story. If you can't write a short story, write a 500-word flash fiction story. Just literally one scene between 2 of your favorite characters from something. And people who are also fans of that thing, they are going to love you for it. And build yourself an addiction to that feedback loop of having people go, hey, I like what you wrote. And every time you're then working on your own original stuff, think back to that and go, oh my gosh, it's going to feel so good when this story is done and people out there who I don't even know are reading it.
Outside of writing, legacy books, and underrealm.net, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I love video games. I love snowboarding, and I love, love, love Dungeons and Dragons. I play probably too much Dungeons and Dragons. I need to every once in a while bow out of a game because I really need to get my writing hours in. As soon as we are done here, I'm going to go be a dungeon master for my kids and my family. And then as soon as that game is done, I am going to play in a game with some other friends of mine. I I love collaborative storytelling. It's, everything that I create in legacy books, the stuff that I write myself, I'm always finding more ways to bring more people into the process. And when I'm working with another author and publishing their work, I love collaborating with them. And D&D is that you're all sitting around a table telling a story together and using math rocks to point the next direction of the story. I really feel like if you're an author, you should at least give D&D or other role-playing games a shot and study. If you don't do that, study shows like Critical Role or what's it called? It's not natural. Dimension 20 and other shows like that that are centered around it, because it is really a storytelling masterclass, and it is just like reading history. We were talking before about reading history all the time. One of the best things about history is it's a tremendous source of ideas, and D&D can be the exact same way. When you've gone through so many different story ideas and plot lines that were imagined by other people or that happened in real life, it's really hard to run out of ideas for what could happen next. You might run into the opposite problem and not be able to decide between all of the various options you can dream up. And I would rather deal with that problem.
Oh, most definitely. Oh, you've given me a great idea for what I have to do next.
Hey,
Lastly, and I cannot believe we're on the last question already,
right?
is there anything else you would like to say that you haven't as yet in this interview?
Honestly, it's if somebody out there is a writer or wants to be, um, I think that it's really incredibly important to be gentle with yourself and not to get into comparisons that aren't going to serve you. And what I mean by that is that it is totally fine, in my opinion, to read other authors and to aspire to create the same effect on other people that amazing author created on you. Um, it's fine to look at storytellers, to look at genres, and to be like, I want to achieve that level of prose, or I want to write a plot that's all super tight and fast paced like that, or I want to create characters that other people will love as much as I love this character. But we can all get into pretty toxic ideas of the necessity of success and what success looks like. I haven't gotten to talk about this other than to my own audience, because this is the first podcast interview I've done since this happened. But like I said, there was a period of time where I wasn't publishing, and my career just sort of like trickled down a little bit. Trickle down is actually associated with a different economic phenomenon. It just trailed off slowly over time. And the books are still selling. I'm still making an income from it, but it's not. There were certain, it's just been like a little bit of a rougher time for me and my family, and that was disheartening, and frankly, just sort of discouraging. And I was never going to stop writing. I was never going to stop doing anything like that. But I was just like, what am I going to do about this? And a couple of weeks ago, an old friend of mine reached out to me, and she was like, I'll make this story as short as possible. This friend of mine reached out to me and offered me a job, and I was like, I don't need a job. I'm writing. I'm doing totally fine. And she was like, okay, but you know how to do all these things that I really, really need. And so if you did come work for me, let me tell you what that would look like. And she told me how much she would pay me and everything like that. And I talked about it with my wife, and I just realized that I can do this job and have a day job and write at the same time, which is what like 95% of all authors do, including traditionally published ones. Toni Morrison, writer and teacher, educator, lecturer, all those sorts of things. She is not a full-time writer. She just isn't. And that is true with so many other people, including anyone out there listening. Probably your favorite author is probably day job and writing. And that would enable me also to suddenly, provide things for my family that I'd been wanting to do for a long time and hadn't been able to. It was clearly the right thing to do. And for a week, I struggled with an idea that is not a healthy idea, that if I was doing that, then I was giving up on writing. I was failing at my dreams. I was losing on everything that I had ever wanted to do in my life. That's not true. And I eventually came to realize that after lots of talking, lots of great advice from many wonderful people in my life. And now I have a job, and I get up every morning and I write for 3 hours, and then I go to work. And suddenly my family and I are just having a much easier time of it, even in just the 2 weeks that it's been that way. And you know what? I'm more productive when I'm at the computer because I'm not just forcing myself to sit there for 8 hours a day and squeeze whatever juice I can out of a stone. I'm going out and I'm seeing the world and I'm interacting with people and I'm doing stuff. And then I'm coming back with new ideas and new experiences that can make their way onto the page. All of which is to say, it's really easy to have unhealthy ideas of what you should be doing or what your career should look like or what success looks like if you're only basing it off of some idea of what success looks like for somebody else and not what's best for you at the time. Maybe the best thing for you is to stick to writing fan fiction. Maybe the best thing for you is to write for yourself, or maybe the best thing for you is to write what you love, start to put it out there and let it find its audience rather than bending yourself to the will of what you think the marketplace wants or trying to achieve overnight international success or become a New York Times bestseller. The best thing for you might be taking care of yourself and your own life and seeing that your own needs are met and bringing that sense of your own healthy self to your work. And I think that that might result in a better book, which should be the most important thing to you anyway, at least according to me.
And that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I really hope you have enjoyed this interview with the Amazon best-selling author and the owner of Legacy Books, Garrett Robinson. Like, comment and hit that subscribe button and tell me, what did you think of the interview? Do you agree that Garrett is enthusiastic, prolific and knowledgeable? In the description below, I have left links to Garrett's website, his Patreon page, and to his books. If you enjoy reading epic, heroic fantasy, then you are going to love Garrett's books. So check them out now. Moreover, my debut fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter, is out. If you are looking for a book that is short, fast-paced, and full of suspense, then check it out. I have left a link for the book in the description below as well. Otherwise, until next time, keep well. Once again, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it and I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button and then you will be the first to receive more awesome content from my channel, and I hope to see you again soon.